7:30 on our clock here, and I'd like to welcome you all to this April 19th Committee of the Whole meeting. We do have 4 items on this evening's agenda, but before we begin, I'd like to share a couple quick reminders. First, the floor will be open to the audience for 20 minutes to address the City Council on matters that are on this evening's agenda. After the City Council has discussed these items with staff, we ask that persons wishing to address the City Council keep their comments to 5 minutes in length. And of course, comments must be addressed to the City Council as a whole through the mayor, and profanity may not be used in any form. With that, we'll go ahead and begin with our first item here, which is an update on the Brookwood condominiums proposal for stormwater detention issues. And for this, I'll defer to Director Horn. Director Horn, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Both presentations tonight that I am lucky enough to provide are just provided for the City Council primarily to educate new members on the projects. I'll try to walk through the projects as best I can. To the best of my knowledge, there's no direction being requested tonight, no decision making by the City Council. We're simply looking, I just thought it was a good opportunity with my leaving to provide everyone an overview of the projects based on my best knowledge of them as they will be proceeding and or proceeding through the capital projects committees in the near future. Over the years, we've had a lot of major projects that have kind of floundered in the budget. I'm proud to say we completed most of them. These are really the last 2 big ones that will require staff's attention, so I thought it was appropriate to educate the council on these projects. The first project that it was in the city budget for at least 10 years before we took it out of the budget till we could get a better handle on it. Basically, it's a drainage, or it's a detention area immediately south of the Brookwood condominiums, which are right off of West Frontage, just south of Hicks Road and Kirchhoff Road intersection. The detention area is sandwiched between the Brookwood condominiums and the White Oaks subdivision, which for those of you who know the area, it's Jody Court. Ultimately, as similar problems we have in all areas of the communities, we have undersized storm sewer systems serving these areas. In addition to that, when these subdivisions were built, the MWRD did not have the regulations it currently has. So what I did is I traced back from the detention area the piping that flows into that detention area. So all that yellow piping you see on the map, along with the stormwater from the west, which is unincorporated, I believe it's unincorporated Palatine, flows in through that area, but I don't have any data on their storm sewer system. So again, it was just to give you an idea of how much storm sewer outside the limits of the actual subdivision go to that detention area. There's a variety of problems in this project. I'm just forewarning you, this is not an easy project to solve. It's very complex, and as such, it is one of the reasons it went 12 years without much action. This unincorporated Palatine area used to what's called sheet flow. So basically, the water would just run across the ground or in ditches and just kind of make its way from west to east. Many years ago, or at least well before I came on board, they improved the streets and installed storm sewers, which created more of a point flow situation, which basically brought the water into that detention area quicker. Which obviously the White the white arrow shows, that all that water from that whole light blue area basically gets to that point very quickly and shoots into the detention area. Problem number two, when the White Oaks subdivision was constructed, the area north of the red line that you see there, I just provided a mapped version and an aerial version so you could see. That area was platted to be detention. The idea was that that developer was to have combined that area with the area to the north to create a larger detention area. This was done many, many years ago, I think pre-1985. We found years later that they had not done any of that work. I don't know the history of how we got to that point, but that work was never completed. And by the time the city recognized that that was the problem, we had found that most of the residents in that area had built decks and sheds and very nice landscaping, and they had started utilizing that land because the builder had installed a fence, as you can see on the bottom picture, a yellow line. That yellow line is a fence that goes across all of those properties. So the reality is a portion of their rear yard and the fence are within the limits of the detention easement. Problem number three is it is completely overgrown with trees, scrub brush, plant materials of all different kinds, sizes. The entire detention area looks just like that. That's one little area to the east, but I could have taken that picture anywhere. It's filled with very large overgrown trees. One of the problems that we have with this is not only does it create erosion problems, the loose soil then goes into the pipe, clogs up the pipe, and becomes a drainage issue. You've got leaves and sediment that actually reduces the capacity of the detention area because of that. One of the major problems, and I think I touch over it, just to give you an idea, this is a detention area at South Park within the city limits, and another example of a detention area to the right that holds water. But usually, unless it's a ton of acreage, they don't use wooded areas for detention. Now there have been times when many acres of wooded areas depressed, and in an effort to save good quality trees, they use that as detention. But the Brookwood issue is not one of those issues. The picture on the left is primarily what we would like to see the detention area look like. As you can see, the last big problem is that both the residents who own the single-family homes and the residents who live in the condominiums, primarily the homeowners association, which is who we deal with or have dealt with historically, neither wants to lose any of the trees because they want it for screening against the other property. Again, I explained to you the problems with that. The thing that compounds this problem is the condominium complex, the HOA, owns that land. The detention is owned by them. Previous staffs have tried to negotiate with them for the city to take ownership of that detention so we could go in and responsibly clear the area out so it would function better, even though it's dramatically undersized. The idea was that we could at least get it working better to see if maybe it could function. We made the mistake shortly after I started here of one of our staff went in there and he was asked to leave very quickly in a very forceful way. So the police were called. It was a whole scene. So my point is, I think both parties, both single family and condominium, feel very strongly about not losing that Again, just an overhead to see all the tree material. That detention area is between that parking lot and the resident's backyard. So you can see it's almost non-existent. It really doesn't function well. So I brought this picture out because to provide you the piece of the history you might not have. Several years ago, probably 2017, 2018, the city council, this issue was brought to the city council. There was a lot of trepidation by the city council to provide direction of any kind. There was some, I would call it hesitant direction provided by a 4-3 vote to tell the city attorney to begin condemnation proceedings. So what and you'll see it in your packet, that packet of information towards the end the engineer provided. What the engineer had designed was a way to take some of the property from the Brookwood Homeowners Association, realign the parking lot area to provide extra detention. Now, that extra detention would still be only 2/3 of what's required, okay? I wasn't part of the project, but it was my understanding that there was direction given to the city attorney to just start working a little bit on it, but don't dive head first, because until we got a little better, clearer direction and some, I think if we could have done it, there would have been a 3.5 to 3.5 vote. I think people were upset that someone did not show, because there just wasn't a big appetite to go through the condemnation proceedings. Nevertheless, that was the direction given. At the same time, on a concurrent track, our director at the time was asked to continue trying to negotiate with the HOA. We shortly after this discussion, maybe 4 to 6 months, members of the condominium complex came in and met with our director because they were trying to put together a group to take over control of the HOA, and they felt comfortable that they could get the votes needed to give that over to the city. So when that happened, there was a lot of conversation with the city manager, city attorney. I think they said, let's stop that right now. If we feel like we might be able to work with this condominium, it's much better for everyone if we just work with them as opposed to against them. And then, like I said, that was probably 2018. Shortly after that, the previous director, Fred, retired. And by that time, we had taken this project out of the capital plan because we really didn't feel like we had a good hold on how we were going to fix this long term. And ultimately, we will be bringing this project back through the Capital Projects Committee starting this year. So I wanted to be able to give you my brief knowledge about the project so you understood what was involved, where we were with it. Ryan Lindeman, our city engineer, is in the audience, so if you do have questions regarding the history, he was much more involved with it than I was. But we wanted to give you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have on that project kind of before I was not available to answer them. So I don't think we really have a lot of, I know there's no staff that has the history left at Public Works regarding this project. So I think that was the last slide, yeah. So that's the project in a nutshell. It's not an easy project. It is something that will be discussed through the Capital Projects Committee, and I'm assuming something will be discussed at a city council meeting in the future following the results of those kind of workshop atmosphere discussions. So happy to answer any questions you might have, but right now that was just a little education on that.
Well, thank you for the update,
Sure.
Director Horn. Are there any questions, comments? Alderman Budmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Rob, so you said earlier that technically it's all that area in blue except for the easement on the homeowners association to the south is all owned by Brookwood condominium, and they're not properly maintaining that, is that correct? And so
Correct.
what, if we wanted to be the big bad city, what would we do to get them to properly maintain? Because obviously, if they're not maintaining it to the degree that it floods their neighbors to the south, then I'm assuming that that's something that there could be litigation entered into, that they need to properly maintain their, I mean, if we had a different piece of property that wasn't being maintained and it affected the neighbor next door and his basement flooded as a result of their lack of, I'm assuming we have some opportunity to go after them and to encourage them to have a better solution where we could all participate rather than they pay for the whole thing.
I agree with that, and I think that is a good thing to start those discussions again. Hopefully, the previous HOA is no longer there, because it was my understanding that the previous HOA had none of it. There was any discussion at all about cutting a tree or removing a bush for any reason was off the table. They just were not cooperative at all. I brought the city engineer up here because I was going to answer it in a way that hopefully I'm not misspeaking. I believe that certain regulations that the MWRD has that we enforce by reference were established after this was built, so I don't know that some of those regulations apply to that. I'm not 100% certain. I feel like if we had something solid to stand on, we would have pursued that already, because to my best of my knowledge, that is in violation of MWRD regulations. But again, if those regulations weren't established to the late 80s and this was built in the mid 70s, I believe, I don't know that it would apply. Am I mistaken?
No, I would agree. I think until they disturb their property to a certain acreage or threshold that would kick in MWRD requirements, there's really nothing, to my understanding, of the city.
So if they wanted to resurface the south end of their parking lot, we would be forced to give them a permit to do it, even though it's abutting an area that they're not properly maintaining?
I'm not entirely clear on that, but from MWRD standpoint, I think if you're not increasing the impervious area, which is one of their big metrics for stormwater detention and stormwater management, then no.
Isn't there significant erosion underneath that south end of their parking lot already as a result of the lack of maintenance?
That I'm not sure. I know that it's full of sediment, and the buildup of sediment has reduced the detention volume of the existing basin. But as far as the erosion, I'm not entirely sure of that. I think maybe to the west there might be some. I know they've done some infill, or someone has done some infill, maybe Palatine, in the past, but the integrity of the parking lot, I'm not entirely sure.
And then, I hear your recalling of it, but I recall that there was, the city council, I thought, was a little bit more forceful in saying, go ahead and condemn the property. But it was like, we were told that there was going to be a new HOA and that we could save the money from the condemnation process to just go ahead and spend it on cleaning the deal out. And then I think that's when it fell apart. I don't know if they were successful or not, but I think we all took a wait-and-see attitude, and then nothing happened.
I think you're not incorrect in that. I can't remember the very specifics of the discussions, but I remember at some point, whether it was the city manager that gave the direction or the city council, that the city attorney was asked to kind of like not go full steam ahead with the condemnation, because we felt like there was an opening here with the new HOA. And like I said, between Fred's retirement and then me coming on board and then us kind of trying to refocus our priorities on other projects, I think some of that was lost in the overtime. So
Yeah, it's not like we ever voted to stop the condemnation process as a council.
I didn't think that was the case, but I felt like in talking to Fred historically, that there was some discussion about the city attorney not moving, which is why I think it just kind of petered out and never really came back to the city council. Believe me, I was trying to figure out what caused it to stop, because I can remember being at the meeting when they talked about doing concurrent tracks, condemnation and discussions with the new HOA, and hopefully, yeah, we would spend a little money on the condemnation, but hopefully we wouldn't get to that point. And then after that, I can't speak to what happened.
And I believe part of the problem is that the HOA for the condominium association was largely run by absentee owners, and that renters had no voice or vote, and so absentee owners had no reason to look for ways to spend more money as an association.
Your recollection is correct. I as you say it, I'm now remembering that as well. So.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Alderman Budmets. Alderman O'Brien?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And this is maybe more for Ryan. Just based on the rep, the really only solution is to get that cleaned out. Because I know everybody wants the trees and the natural and things like that, but that really, I mean, that's what we've got in front of us. There's the three alternatives, which all are about averaging, I'm going to say 4.25, just roughly on the options A, B, C. But that's really the way to get this corrected, is that area's got to be cleaned. I'm related to behind us at Kimball Hill. When you clean that out and put all of the new stuff there, I know there's no residences right by the creek in Kimball Hill, but that's that's really the solution, so nobody floods anymore, right? That's the area that's got to be cleaned out?
Yeah, I believe the alternate designs may have been, I was not privy to the discussions the city manager
Sure.
and the previous director had with the HOA or the city attorney, but I think a lot of those alternatives were driven by those discussions to get costs down.
Okay.
And obviously the cheapest would be clear out the brush, but leave the trees, leave the parking lot as is, but dredge it out, put in a rock channel, and then just kind of stepwise increasing their costs, expanding. But yes, the goal is to increase the capacity of the basin to withhold water until it hits that weir and makes its way to the south and east.
And there's really no remediation. As Attorney Wolf, this might be for you too. I know you weren't part of the council at that time, but since in the summaries we received, it said the builder did not follow the easements and things that were supposed to be in the detention basin requirements. We don't have any option to go back to that, do we? Like, I don't know what was in the terms of the subdivision development, but I know that was one of the points Director Horn hit on, is that clearly the detention basin is a third of the size, because if this remedy will take it to 2/3, that they just didn't follow. There's probably no remediation there this time because it's so long ago.
Probably not
Okay.
with the subdivision developer. But I could look at, the past materials, but that
Okay.
would probably not be likely.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Mayor. That's all I have.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien. Alderman Sonoyka?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I wanted to respond to the comment that Alderman O'Brien had brought up about these being the only options, which is to clear the trees. So although I wasn't an elected official on March 21st, 2017, I was present at this meeting in order to support my neighbors and their properties at this point. And ultimately, the options that were presented before us are quite similar to what Director Horn has mentioned, which is even if we went for the most aggressive option, it would not fulfill 50% of the detention requirements for this area, which meant that we would need to revisit engineering and have a different solution. Which is to say, even if all of the property owners at Jody Court had then reestablished the easement, whether or not they had any developments or landscaping on the property, removed all of the trees, and then also took a piece of the Brookwood condominiums parking lot, it would not be enough, not even 50%. And so at the time, the residents had stated that this was not a sufficient solution for the amount of cost and the amount of sacrifice that both properties would be required to take. So I do appreciate Director Horn bringing this topic forward. I'm very pleased to announce to all of the residents of the city that fortunately this is a borderland between Ward 2 and Ward 7. And so I'm really looking forward to working with Alderman Budmats, my colleague, who's also a member of the Capital Projects Committee, to address this issue and to note that he will be representing the interests of his residents in the Brookwood condominiums, as I will for the residents in the Jody Court White Oak subdivision. So in the past, in 2017, the solutions that were proposed were just not sufficient for the residents ultimately. So any projects that we would move forward would require more than what we would have expected from the 2017 items, regardless of pursuing condemnation of the property or just ripping out the trees and then taking land. It is very complex, and I appreciate that we had a nice summary in about 15 minutes for all the items that are involved, but there is a lot that goes back more than 12 years regarding all of the property owners. Some of them have sold their properties since, but they had to sell those properties in flood zones. And so those properties, I believe, require flood insurance, which is quite expensive. So I know that there's a vested interest in pursuing this item. And I'm, again, looking forward to working with Alderman Budmats on that in the future.
Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Any other questions, comments, or concerns on the subject?
I'll take a second stab, Mr. Mayor.
Have at it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had some conversations with Ward 7 aldermen, and we are in agreement that both sides of the creek, if you want to call it that, or detention area, need to pitch in and give. And so it would not be an adequate solution unless the people on Jody Court and the people at the Brookwood condominiums all gave towards the solution, if they're expecting the citizens of Rolling Meadows to also give to solving their problem. So I think all the citizens and those residents directly affected in both wards are going to need to pitch in and give a little bit of their land up to solve their mutual problem.
Thank you. Alderman Sunoika?
And to top that off, I do take all of the concerns of the Jody Court residents to say that they're willing to do what's necessary as long as the problem is truly fixed. So if the city is coming back with, well, 50%, it will be addressed, but you're still going to have a flooded basement, and you're still going to have to sell this property with flood insurance, I know that then we have nothing to compromise with. So I'm hoping that any solutions that we have from the engineering side would be able to present solutions where the detention is completely covered. And it will require significant engineering for this difficult project.
So full mitigation of the issue.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Director Horn?
I'm sorry, and just to be clear, so we're using the right information, the plan as presented by the city engineer at that time would have accounted for 2/3 or 66% of what's required. I think it's great that you guys are talking about the potential to get something from the Jody Courts residents and potentially use a little of that land. And I would not recommend the whole 20 feet. It doesn't make any sense. But maybe that little bit extra does get us closer, and I'm certain that Christopher Burke would love to dive into this project a little more than we did in previous discussions, because it was kind of, as you noted, how can we get this off our plate, and maybe we dive a little deeper into long-term solutions. So that's great feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Anything further? Any more questions, comments, concerns on this item? No? If not, then we'll continue on with our next item after this update on Brookwood condominiums. We'll continue with the Sunset Drive and Brookview Lane Special Use Service Area, the historical discussion, and moving forward. For this, Director Horn, are you going to continue the conversation?
Of course.
All right.
Here we go. I apologize. My first slide, I forgot to put a picture in it, so. It looks a little off, right? So, I was trying to get a lot of things wrapped up today. Thank you. So, it's an odd, blink on the right side. This is really, again, just an education opportunity. As complex an issue as the Brookwood project is, this is equally as complex. So many years ago, the Brookview Sunset area was annexed into the city. For years, the city council had discussions about whether to provide sanitary service there. It is my understanding that the city of Rolling Meadows installed sanitary sewer along Old Plum Grove Road, which is just adjacent to the subdivision, with the hopes that all the residents were going to connect. They were asked to put in the sewer for it. The city committed several $1 million to put in a sewer, and when they were done, 3 residents connected. Everybody else didn't. So the council at that time was the same council that had gone through that project. And so they became very adamant about both the resident and the city being invested into the project. So there were many, many resident meetings that took place with, at the time, Alderman Cannon, Director Vogt, and others to discuss the project and the opportunities that were established. At that time, the discussion was that an SSA should be established for 50% of the cost of the main line, and 100% of the sanitary sewer services. So those are the lines that would go from the main line that's owned by the city to the resident's home. The purpose of that portion of the SSA was to enable residents to amortize the payments for that work over 20 years. I don't have the exact numbers. That's not what I'm here to talk about, but ultimately, I believe, all in, it was about $65,000 per resident. Over 20 years, it was about between $3,000 and $3,500 a year in your tax bill as part of the special service area. Obviously, what we have since learned is when it comes to the sanitary sewer services, when you do an SSA, you have to have a fixed amount across all properties for that work. And so we would be working with the city, or staff would work with the city attorney to establish something that made sense across all properties. There are some properties where the sanitary service is $8,000, other ones where it's $25,000. So anyways, I'm getting down the weeds. That's really, and the last direction we received was, let's put in the sewer main and move forward with the SSA in that fashion. So what happened is, because we had the money budgeted for phase 1, before we had established the SSA, we installed phase 1 of the sanitary sewer. We had the engineer design it in a way that, in the unlikely event that a resident connected before they were permitted, we have something installed in the service line that we could easily disconnect that service until the person followed the proper requirements. But the idea was, we installed phase 1 as part of, really, we were going to start it last year and just it got away from us. So we're working on it now to establish a SSA. We're working with the city attorney and the consulting engineer to establish an SSA that takes into account the cost of the sewer main and the estimated sanitary sewer services. That work is going on right now. The consulting engineer and the city attorney are both working on that project. Just to give you an update, that phase 1, the green line that goes north on Brookview Lane and takes a right on Sunset Drive, was installed. We had talked to Alderman McHale in the past that we felt we were going to be able to complete the second phase and start the sanitary sewer services. We had planned that. We had told residents that that's what we were going to do. Unfortunately, we ran into a problem, and I'll go over that problem in the future in a couple slides. This goes over the special service area. That's what we're working on right now. This was a condition of the installation by the previous city council. The idea was 50-50 cost share. Because we didn't have clear direction through the notes I had reviewed, we made the decision to omit the engineering costs. So that actually reduced the overall cost for the residents. As I said, the total costs, those are very approximate. It allowed residents to spread those costs over a long period of time. I did include in your memorandum for a later date when the SSA is brought to the city council for consideration, that there are other ways that a city council can handle this. Some city councils don't charge anything for the main. Other ones do what's called a recapture agreement, and I think you guys have experience with the Brockway sewer, which we helped a resident establish a recapture. That is an option that the city council can have as well. The bad part about that is the resident then has to come up with 100% of the money on their own for the service and their connection fee and all the fees that would be associated with it. And like I said, we have some residents in that area that, well, most residents are well over $15,000 just for the sewer service. So they would have to come up with that basically in one lump sum for a contractor to do that, then plus the permit fee, plus the connection fee. By us doing it as part of an SSA, there's no permit fee, there's no engineering fee. The contractor does it, it's a clear cost across the board, and we're able to accomplish it that way. That's just a little background on what we're working on with the special service area. The reason we had to change lanes on our original plan was because it's hard to see. You'll see in the next slide, but all the homes that are on the north side of Sunset Drive own the property. Many of them own the entire roadway, which brings up another issue. So their properties go well into the road, and we don't have, the city does not have right-of-way for that area. Because the appraisal value came in higher than expected, we don't have the money to do that part of the project. Therefore, for us to install the sanitary main as proposed, we have to relocate some water main, and it's identified up there with the blue line. So we're going to put in the sanitary main, but we also have to relocate about 150 feet of water main so we can maintain a 10-foot separation, which is a requirement of the IEPA. So that's the only way we can get the sewer in a 33-foot easement as it currently exists. There are currently 22 properties. The rules regarding an SSA, in the last discussions we had with the meetings is we had 11 people strongly in favor of the sewer. We had 4 people that were on the fence about it, and then other opinions, they might be in favor with other information, they might be in favor if they didn't have to pay, things like that. But ultimately, when you establish the SSA, the idea is once we advertise those public hearings, the SSA is established unless we get 51% of the properties involved opposing it. If I'm mistaken, please let me know. But we don't, as a community, we don't need 51% to establish it. We need 51 opposed to not establish it, which is much different than it was originally discussed. So those are the 22 properties that would be impacted by the SSA. And then here is the area. The area in red is the right-of-way that the city needs. I apologize, I should have blown it up more, but you should be able to see how much of that roadway is on private property. Basically, if and not to sound harsh, but if someone got in a car accident, the private property owner would be liable. I think the property owner would be liable. If there was a pothole or some kind of damage, ultimately that's that property owner's responsibility because it's not on public land. I have some real concerns once I saw, kind of saw how much of roadway is outside of our jurisdiction. I have a real concern for the city council moving forward as to what kind of maintenance and what kind of ownership we take in and making sure that's a safe thoroughfare when half of it is not even on city property. In any event, the idea was the right-of-way, we had the engineer look at the right-of-way cost and deduct. It's very hard to see. I can provide information in the future, but we had them deduct the cost of their proposed appraisal fee from the amount of money that it would cost for them to install the service line to enable us to reduce that overall cost. I believe the cost of the entire right-of-way for all I think there's 8 properties, is like $340,000. So that's one of the main reasons we had to push these off to different phases, because we needed more time to get these higher costs into the budget in future years, because the appraisal was just finished 3 weeks ago, was when we got the actual solid numbers. You'll notice next week we have an item being brought to you for the purchase of temporary construction easements. And you can see since 2020, the land value, there's a chart, and it literally starts out here and it goes like that. So the cost has extremely higher than it has been even 2 years ago. So this is why we've adjusted the project. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. Staff in the future will be coming back with more clear questions to request clear direction. I'm just trying to summarize the entire project so you understand all the different moving pieces. So when they do come back, you can at least have a little bit of background, because, as I said, I know Alderman Budmatz and Mayor Gallo were here. Alderman McHale has been intimately involved with the project, asking a lot of questions. But I think for the purpose of the entire council, it was important that I at least walk through it and answered any questions you had. So, again, I could go further if you want, but I think right now I'm just willing to answer any questions you have.
And one note for the council, this slide is included in the agenda packet, so while it is hard to read up on the screen, it is in the agenda packet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Sabo, for that. And then Director Horn, thank you for the update. Questions, comments, concerns? I see Alderman Budmatz eager.
Ready to hit it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What are we doing as far as maintenance on this road now? Are we plowing snow?
Yeah,
Why?
I agree. I agree. I did not realize so much of the roadway is on private property. Now, I would have to defer to the attorney, because my assumption is that the city has some sort of obligation to make the roadways safe for public travel, just general, but I don't know the legality of that. That's, we had a discussion at the staff level when we saw the exhibit for the first time, and we're like, what? Whoa. Like, I don't know that we should be doing these things, because it really is a dangerous situation from a legal perspective.
And when this was annexed, there was no right-of-way, so then technically it's a private road?
Well, a part of it is. If you look at it, everything south of the red line is within city right-of-way, but everything north of the bottom part of that red area, everything north of that is on private property. So the entire, except for that little section on the right, the entire right lane or north lane is in private property. So.
What's our liability like if we're plowing that land and something happens? I mean, should we continue to provide services on land that's private property?
Oh, yeah.
The city doesn't have an obligation to maintain roadways that are not city-owned roadways. From a liability perspective, if work was done on those private roadways, the city does maintain a lot of immunities per state law for work that is done by the municipality, but there is no obligation unless there is an agreement between the city and the private property owners.
I would think, this is awkward to say, but I'm just going to say it, I would think that if people want to get plowed out and receive those services, they would be wanting to provide that easement to the cities for the purpose of getting those services. And so, obviously, without cost, unless they want to pay for plowing.
Again, I am at a little bit of a disadvantage because I wasn't at all the meetings that took place. I know the acquisition of the right-of-way was a major component, and what had been discussed a lot was ways that the city could barter the costs of connection fees and some of the costs of construction in exchange for right-of-way. I know that was a major part of the discussion. As far as, what we were going to do as far as maintenance and moving forward, again, I wasn't there. I will tell you, we were all a little surprised by the amount of the roadway that's on private property. That's a little concerning.
If a resident wanted to put a fence at the end of their property in the middle of the roadway, they could technically do it?
I think we have rules regarding front yard fences, but there are a lot of things I think they could do that I don't know that we could control. Because there's no easement, there's no right-of-way, and,
Okay.
Or a bush. So
Or bushes, right?
when we first discovered the boundary issue with the properties and the right-of-way that the city would like to have we addressed this with our Cook County commissioners that oversee this area? And I know nobody likes to forfeit property in any capacity, but if we can work with our Cook County commissioner and the residents and identify a way that there's an opportunity to draft new boundaries and in reciprocity for that, there's a reduction in property tax fees to those individuals. But we should at least have a conversation with our Cook County representatives on this and see what we can do reciprocally with these residents so that the city can maintain some sort of control on a public road that is essentially treated as a private stretch at this point because of the issue.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. But like I said, we took the approach that we just needed to get it as a right-of-way, and we started doing all the work necessary to do that with getting appraisals and checking historical plats and things like that, county records, title searches, things like that. Our engineer has been working on that for, probably since the summer, getting that stuff going, to try and get to that point. But like I said, we didn't just see this yesterday. We saw this last year, and we start moving on it, basically to get it done, not to have this discussion. And I think we were just from the perspective of, we are going to work with each resident and try and work out, carve it out to get each one to provide that right of way. And you are correct that once that right of way is established, property taxes are reduced. But the city, I think, just for residents' benefit, the city, I don't believe, has any intention of doing anything with the land other than drawing an imaginary line to make sure that we have a legal right to be there and do maintenance on it and not have any issues. And again, I think, I'm not an attorney, but I think each homeowner takes on some liability, whether they know it or not, or whether it gets pursued or not is another thing. But I think if someone were to get in an accident or hurt themselves or whatever on the road, that may be able, someone might have the ability to go back to the private property owner and say, I'm suing you, there's a pothole here and I tripped on it and it's on your property. I don't know what it, I'm probably speaking out of turn, but there are some things like that I think should be a concern for all parties involved.
Is there anything you want to say to that?
I would agree that Rob is correct, that a private property owner doesn't have the same types of immunities that the public entity has. So if there is any injury that occurs on private property, there could be exposure to liability to that private property owner.
Thank you. Alderman McHale?
Yes. For the acquisition of the, because when we first started talking about this was a 3-phase process.
Yes.
Phase 1 was last year, and we were hoping that 2 and 3 were going to be this year.
Yes.
And that doesn't seem to be the case because of the acquisition of the right-of-way. And the right-of-way acquisition, I'm assuming, is phase 2. Was?
No,
Phase
the right-of-way acquisition was going to be part of phase 2, but as we said, because the right-of-way acquisition was so high.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
a twofold problem here. This is
Yeah.
this is a new development
Yeah.
because when we were trying to deal with the right-of-way, we were at a lower point on the property cost, and now it is
Yes.
through the roof, and now we're kind of at a impasse.
Yeah.
So,
That's
I know that the residents over there, they had talked about, using the different means and ways to, do I want to say barter the cost of the right-of-way. Is there still an option for that now?
Yeah, I think that is what we would propose, and again, I think that's for the staff moving forward which is why I had the engineer do that calculation that you see on the attachment, is the revised cost of the acquisition is the original appraisal less the cost of their service line. So some of them are still, I think still total.
Okay.
You know, I don't want to misspeak. I thought it was still going to be between 160 and 170, 160 and 170,000 for all 8 properties, but the city would just absorb the cost of their sewer service in lieu of that, which we are already have in the budget. So it would just be a less of an adjustment to next year's budget, but it still would be an adjustment. So
provided that residents can work with the city, could we still see phase 2 and 3 this year, or no?
the only phase we are able to do this year is phase 2 because we have to relocate water main to do it. If we had the right-of-way already, there would not be a need to relocate the water main. But I think it's important, you know, this project's been in the budget for years and years and years. We've had the engineer design it in a way that allows us to cut off service if someone were to illegally connect. So I'm of the opinion, let's get the main installed. That way, if a resident wants to install and they are a property that we require right-of-way from, well, we just make that a condition of their connection. And then we work it out on an individual basis. But I think, well, I know there's just not enough money with other major projects we have going on in the utilities fund over the next year, that there's just not enough room in the budget for that. So we're trying to spread it out over a couple years to accommodate that. And I can assure you, we will have to make adjustments to the budget to accommodate whether it be $160,000 or $340,000 in acquisition costs. There will be adjustments that have to be made in stormwater or sanitary to accommodate that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Alderman McHale. Any other questions or comments on this subject? No? Thank you, Director Horn.
Thank you.
Appreciate the update on that. And I do see a few names on the sign-in sheet, so we'll go ahead and call those. Just a reminder, it is a 5-minute time allotment for each of the individual speakers. And the first name on the sign-in sheet is Cecilia and Kevin Herdigan. Herdigan? Okay. Kevin?
He's the one that married me into this
It's always the men's.
So my name is Kevin Herdigan. I live at 3001 Brookview Lane, which used to be 1728 Brookview Lane, and I've lived there since I was in 3rd grade. So I predate everybody in the room, okay? So if you want to talk about history, I have it all. So just today I went and pulled out the annexation agreement that was referenced before. And in the annexation agreement, it specifically says, it was multi-page of course, but it specifically said that there would be no sewer installed at the owner's expense. Because at that time, Rolling Meadows really wanted this property. It's way out of character with the rest of the village. It's a signature area with 300-year-old oak trees, and they really wanted it. And they wanted the tax revenue from it because of all the expensive land and expensive houses. And so we've been paying these taxes since I've been in third grade, and the people were very concerned that there wouldn't be a straightening of the road. That was a topic back then. We knew that the road was off, but it's a rural feel to it, and we did not want a straight road with curbs and lights and take down the trees, and that's what a lot of areas are these days, and we don't want to go that way. If you come to our neighborhood today, you'll see there's being some new houses being built. In our area, the value isn't even in the houses, right? You can take the house down. It's the acreage and the trees. So we don't want the road straightened. I don't want the trees taken down, and I don't want all this development. So the only provision in that annexation agreement for sewer was if there was a health issue, and I don't think anybody has come out and determined that there's a health issue in our area. I've had a few inspectors come out, and they specifically told me they're not qualified to evaluate that. So until somebody sends a person out that's qualified and deems it a health issue, I don't see that anybody has any authorization to install sewers. In terms of the SSA, I was never asked to vote for it. I don't know who came up with it and decided it should move forward, but I challenge anybody to come up with a document where they took a vote and had my name that said, yeah, I want an SSA. Never did. Still haven't seen the opportunity to vote on anything. There were some guidance surveys, which I have copies of, and they specifically say this is just general guidance to gather information. There was no vote ever taken. Now, everybody's changed, right? The whole council's changed. A lot of the residents have changed. But I still have the documents. So when I look at the rest of Rolling Meadows, regular residents in Rolling Meadows pay $1,800 to $2,500 to connect to the sewer. You implemented a fee for the Old Plum Grove property of $7,000. Obviously, that was too high, or you would have more people connect. So I don't see any reason why the average resident pays $1,800 to $2,500. The premium resident on Plum Grove pays $7,000, and we're being asked to pay $60,000. Where's the equality in that? I mean, you put a new street in as a capital improvement. You didn't ask me to pay for the street. So I don't know why I'm being asked to fund a capital improvement in the village. I'd love to hear an explanation of that. I don't think it's the village policy to be burdening the residents with capital improvements. I understand a connection fee and a monthly fee and all of that, but I don't see the logic. Just because it's a big expense, why is this different than every other capital project in the city? I just don't see that. And then one other topic, which is just a little bit of a side issue, but as part of this project on the map, there's also a proposal to issue a new drainage feature, which is just upstream from my property, that's just going to route all the runoff directly into Salt Creek, creating flooding downstream. Part of my yard is already in floodplain, and I think current public policy is more to let the rainwater drain where it lands, not rushing it down to create a flood in another area. I think in the Brookwood they were already talking about how all the water just rushes down and overwhelms the area to the east, and now you're proposing rushing it all down and dumping it in Salt Creek, which has already had a connection years ago from Kennedy Pond. So each year now my backyard is about 30 to 40% underwater. And it is a designated floodplain, and I knew that going in. But I don't think it's appropriate to be directing more and more water that's going to create flood problems downstream.
30 seconds, sir.
Any other questions for me? I could give you all the history you like.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, we'll take, as you know, this is an ongoing conversation among the council and
Right.
Public Works. And so we will take your questions that you propose to us and provide those in upcoming comments, feedback at the next presentation on the subject.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The next name is Jim, and I believe it's Jim McHayes? Hanson? Okay. Please come up to the podium, sir.
I'm going to agree and disagree with a lot of what you just said. But I think I'm going to hold a lot of my comments until we have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about what the proposed next steps are, because I've had conversations with the city. I've been there 30 years. Conversations about the 33 feet that the town wants aren't new. This has been going on for 15 years. So why all of a sudden do you go ahead and put half the sewer line in and then come back and decide, we have 33 feet we want to take from it? This is not new. This is information that's been on public record for many years. So I'm a little confused about the mismanagement on how this has got to this point. I also think there's some legal issues associated with this that we're definitely going to want to explore. So let's just get to the next step on what you're exploring. The $60,000 per home cost, I don't know where that comes from. There's never been an explanation about how do we get to that number and how we get to some of these other numbers. So I think there's a lot of missing information, and this needs to be vetted, discussed, and then walked through in a different way, because right now this is a mess. Because we have half of a street that has sewer line, the other half doesn't. And there's a lot of questions about how this cost is going to be reconciled. So, thank you.
Thank you. And the third and final name, Derek Domain.
I apologize, Mr. Mayor. I signed in thinking it was a general meeting sign-in sheet. I have no questions.
Okay. Well, thank you for your signature. Appreciate that. Well, that wraps it up for the public comments on this particular subject. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns from the council on the subject before we pursue the next topic this evening? Alderman McHale?
I just want to thank all you guys for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. That's it.
Thank you. Then this will move us on to the third item here this evening, which is the review of telephonic attendance and the ordinance, specifically with regards to our AV or audiovisual upgrades to enable hybrid attendance for the city meetings, such as these. And for this, we'll start with Manager Sabo to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. Good evening. Included in the agenda packet is a brief synopsis of the improvements that have been made to the council chambers that previously enabled telephonic attendance, which allows for two-way communication by a remote participant, specifically a council member who's off-site for a allowed reason in accordance with the Open Meetings Act and the City Code. Improvements were made in 2019 to allow for that two-way conversation, and at that time, pre-pandemic, we didn't really contemplate that we would be in a post-pandemic world where hybrid technology and video conferencing would advance and become a day-to-day part of municipal operations. So at the time when those improvements were made, video was not incorporated into the AV improvements in this room. And so in light of us coming out of the pandemic and foreseeing us incorporating and potentially using this type of technology, city staff had pulled a proposal from a company who's routinely done the improvements and support for the room AV equipment to allow for two-way video conferencing, which we all typically refer to as hybrid. If an alderman is participating remotely for an approved reason, the individual would be able to use Zoom, for instance, or whatever telecommunication modality to view the city council and participate in the meeting remotely by video. And also the city council would be able to see that remote participant on the existing screens in the room currently. And so we did pull a quote. That number was included in the agenda packet. It is $6,975 for the improvements necessary to enable that. The additional component and part of that cost also is to allow the video to capture that two-way, the two feeds, and combine it into a single unified video stream that will go out through our live feed as well as be captured for our retention purposes. And so we are seeking council's direction as it relates to whether or not we should pursue additional improvements to the room to enable that hybrid technology. There is money in the CIP in the amount of $24,000 that's been budgeted this year for general AV maintenance and improvements for this room. And so if the council does support this, we'll go ahead and proceed with contracting with the contractor and implementing those improvements. I'm also happy to answer any additional questions that may exist on the telephonic ordinance. I did include a copy within the agenda packet and am happy to answer any questions. CIO Wasim Khan is also available if there are any technical spec questions as well.
Thank you, Manager Sabo. I do appreciate you bringing this up for the council for discussion tonight. As you know, I'm a big advocate for technology and innovation. My biggest concern was hosting hybrid meetings that were seamless and not clumsy for the viewers at home, or for capturing the conversations and the record of our meetings in perpetuity. And for me, if this is a nominal fee to ensure that we can host seamless hybrid opportunities for meetings and still capture the quality of a council meeting or a committee of the whole meeting, I am all in favor of it, especially if there's dollars in the budget for this. My one concern would be that we don't take advantage of this technology in a capacity that makes us be less willing to maintain a physical presence when necessary. I think there's certain things that you can't substitute a physical presence for. I do know that the future holds untold truths, and we don't know when or where we may have to adopt this practice, but I'm all in favor of this. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns, technical questions? Alderman Sunoika?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also very much in favor of this. This is a difficult job for a lot of people to be able to participate in city government. It's a lot of hours, it's a lot of prep from our standpoint, and being able to have a different way to approach city meetings for any future individuals who are interested in public office is a great way to open up this opportunity for more varied individuals that maybe have jobs that don't allow them to necessarily be here on Tuesdays all of the time, which is a qualified reason to be able to join remotely. I'm also curious to know if these capabilities would allow individuals who maybe are homebound who would like to participate in any of our city council meetings. In the past, the last time we brought this up at a committee of the whole meeting, we had been told that it was not feasible to have anyone be able to dial in, but that was pre-pandemic, and we have done many meetings where individuals were able to then participate in those meetings. We had probably more participation than we've ever had before, save this night, thanks to Alderman McHale's engagement with her residents. So would these improvements also then allow residents to perhaps contact the city clerk or the city in any capacity to then be able to connect and then comment?
So I'd like to bring up CIO Khan, if I may, just to talk to the technical specs of the question. I can see that there would be ability to do so if someone were to make the request in advance if they weren't able to attend. But I do want to defer to Wasim to see if technically that would be something we could do. And then also it's a policy direction and question for the council as a whole as to whether or not we want to entertain that type of an approach.
Good evening. Well, the simple answer is yes. Since it's a web conferencing software, we can allow multiple participants, be it aldermen or public, should we decide to do that, to allow that option.
Thank you. In that case, then this is even more of a reason to pursue, because it will increase potentially the participation of our residents who maybe can't make it here to be able to then comment and participate. Thank you.
As I just want to provide some legal insight on this as the council considers whether or not to move forward with this. But as the Open Meeting Act is written right now, the council does have more flexibility with respect to remote attendance during a declaration of disaster as declared by the governor. But once that disaster declaration is over, there are limitations to remote attendance at meetings. It does require, the Open Meetings Act will require still a physical quorum be present for the meeting to continue. And those that want to attend remotely have to qualify for that via a personal illness or disability. They have to be absent for employment purposes or business of the public body or a family or other emergency. So if those requirements are not met, remote attendance would not be allowed. But so I just want to let the council know of the council members' limitations on attending remotely outside of a disaster declaration.
Thank you for reminding us of those stipulations. Any other questions or comments? Alderman
No,
O'Brien?
I would just say I'm in full support of this as well. I think it serves a lot of great purposes, as Woman Sonoyka just pointed out as well. So I'd be in full support with what is seen as kind of a minimal cost for the huge benefit that would come for it, and since it is budgeted for this year.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Straw vote then comes next here, as Alderman Bessetti pointed out. So all those in favor of allowing staff to pursue these technical opportunities, show your hands in support. It's unanimous. We look forward to having an update and seeing these technologies in action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That'll move us along to the fourth and final item, which is the proposed Rolling Meadows policy and application for Cook County Class 6B incentive requests. And for this, Martha Coroner, our business advocate.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. During recent reviews of Cook County Class 6B incentive requests, there's been kind of a growing concern among public officials and decision makers about the lack of structure in the review and approval process. To date, it has been past practice in Rolling Meadows to not have a formal application process, and no fee has been charged. So it's been very, very general. At this point in time, the EDC has reviewed the attached materials. They reviewed it on April 4th. They had no comments going forward on the materials. Their desire is to continue to keep the review process somewhat open-ended and streamlined, and to continue, well, probably more so going forward, to place the burden of proof responsibility on the applicant to justify the incentive. So without getting too detailed, the program is designed to increase employment opportunities, improve or enhance the development of new industrial facilities, the rehabilitation of existing industrial structures, and the industrial reutilization of abandoned buildings. So it is a powerful economic tool to bring revitalization and competitive growth to the city of Rolling Meadows. Alderman O'Brien, you were in the meeting, so if I miss anything, catch me up. Anyway, so as you can see in the materials, every community in Cook County tends to review these incentives differently. I took a look at surrounding communities. Some have fees, some don't. Some have a municipal form, some don't. To summarize, we are recommending, and the EDC is recommending, that we charge a $1,000 non-refundable fee, somewhat to cover administrative costs of review, because there is quite a bit of time spent bringing these applications to the point where they can be supported. And then also to have the applicant reimburse the city for legal expenses incurred. We do have a municipal application form that's being proposed, and one of the key elements in this process is to charge the fee, to recapture legal expenses, and to include a requirement for a quantifiable justification for the incentive request. And then basically it requires a pre-application meeting with myself, and we wouldn't ask people to make a $1,000 payment without some certainty that we could support it, that, you know, the zoning issues have been verified, and, you know, there should be hopefully a relative consensus that it's a good incentive request. So that being said, we just have a few questions. Do you like the way the EDC has approached this, and have we missed anything?
Thank you for that. I think we'll start first by asking if there's any questions or any gaps that anyone on the council has observed, or anything that they feel should be incorporated into this policy that the EDC used to vet before this information comes to the council level for a vote. And Alderman Sonoyka.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only question that I had when reviewing this, although I'm in support of it, I wanted to know if there had been any measurable impact from these requirements as a barrier for Rolling Meadows being ultimately chosen as a spot for investment.
Manager Sabo, you and I spoke about this, and so I'll defer to Manager Sabo to share. I had a similar question in private, so to have the floor with that.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I think Rolling Meadows has the benefit of a large number of industrial properties and commercial properties located throughout multiple areas in the city. Typically, investors who are looking at these spaces and looking to make improvements to the spaces are used to working with various municipalities that have similar requirements to what we are recommending as part of our policy. And so, to answer your question, I don't see it as a impediment or a barrier to individuals making investments or pursuing this type of incentive program. ultimately, these all come before the city council for approval, nonetheless, no matter how we frame it. But I think ultimately this does provide us a way to recapture the amount of time and expense that we do incur with reviewing these applications. And in doing so, the developers who are working here are also doing the same kinds of projects at neighboring communities with very similar requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Stanoika. Any other questions, comments? Alderman O'Brien?
No, I was going to say, great question, because we talked about that ADC as well, Alderwoman Sonoyka, and that was a point, like, there was some fees that were even up to the $7,500 and $10,000. And we felt from, not only does it bring some consistency across the applications that we all review, because we've all seen them piecemeal before, is that it also has them put some stake in the game. I mean, probably at a scale of a project this size, $1,000 isn't a whole lot for them, but it also does versus just the, hey, let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks type approach. So that was some of the background too that EDC spoke through. But yeah, we didn't see it as a huge barrier based on, I think it was 6 or 8 communities that Martha provided their specs, and it was anywhere from 1,000 to up to about 7,500 or 10,000.
Yeah, no, it goes way up and
Yeah.
down.
So the long or the short is, this is not atypical for a business or a developer to have to invest a little in order to receive a 6B incentive.
Yep.
So that keeps us par on the course. Alderman Budman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm curious, help me understand, is there a certain percentage of the value of the property that has to be upgraded? So if the property is worth, for purpose of conversation, $1 million, are they required to spend $250,000 in upgrading the property, or $50,000 or $5,000?
There's no specific standard. You know, again, these projects are viewed in terms of employment opportunities. If it's a very, very blighted property, and just as a concern regarding the legalities, the EDC wanted to make sure that we weren't precluding the applicants to get to the Cook County level and meet their standards. So, no, we don't have a quantifiable minimum investment.
So, for purpose of conversation, if somebody's bringing 10 jobs to the city, but we lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax revenues over 25 years, is it worth it for those 10? Or how do we determine that we're getting the proper amount of value for the jobs that are being proposed?
Well, it's, again, a case-by-case basis. Every project, every piece of real estate is unique, and if there's an emerging industries that we want to attract, perhaps this is a valuable tool. Alderman Budmat, so I can't specifically answer your question, but the application process doesn't have specific metrics.
May I jump in?
What I would like to add to that point, and the concept of making sure that we don't miss out as a result of giving a green light to a 6B in order for 10 jobs, but sacrificing on some other end. It's my hope that beyond this council, the EDC will continue to vet each of these individual situations and go through the process of analyzing the value and the benefit to our city, and bring those recommendations to the council before we have to make that vote. And so at that time, we would have a full spectrum of understanding if we were to approve it, what value sets we would receive if we did, or if there wasn't enough value, that information would be transmitted to the council and we could decline to enable that 6B to occur. But Manager Sabo, I saw you had your hand up, and then Alderman O'Brien.
Yeah, just a quick note. I think in the way that this was presented by staff and discussed by the EDC, we didn't necessarily want to preclude anything that we may not have foreseen or thought about as a business model that might come through as a proposal to the city that may have a larger economic benefit but smaller investments. Given the case-by-case nature of this and the fact that this does go through a multi-step evaluation process, I think the EDC supported not including those specifics and more so allowing us to review each application as it comes forward on the merits of what's the economic impact ultimately on the city.
And if I may also add, the 8th general condition implies that strong consideration will be given to projects that involve a greater ratio of investment by the applicant compared to the amount of 6B classification relief over the term of the incentive. So we do recognize that, you know, a good ratio is probably to be valued.
Thank you. And Alderman O'Brien, as liaison to the EDC, do you have anything to add?
No, I was going to say, and we purposely left that Alderman Budmats for the reasons that staff commented on, because we can't. I mean, from a legal perspective, my understanding is we could certainly put in there, because we did bring up the concern that some council members had during these. We could, as a city, put in a threshold. My understanding is that from a legal perspective, we can do that, but we opted not to, and I think that's where some of the bullet points under the item 7 in the narrative came from, is that we want to know the estimate, because we use the example, somebody comes in and paints and puts some shelves in and calls it a day. We had concern about that. That was what EDC discussed. That was the very real sample that that I used at the meeting, and so that is what got some of the narrative bullet points there, is what they're planning to do, the improvements and the costs. So then it's at our discretion to get to that ratio Martha talked about. But that's the reason we decided to leave it out. But to answer your question, we could put something in as a council if we wanted to. We didn't want to go that route because we felt it would potentially limit potential opportunity here.
And to the point of the, if I may, to the point of the adding paint and shelves, I mean, to the permanency of whatever it is that the 6B applicant is going to do. I mean, if he's building something that is going to be resellable versus, shelves which are going to move out and moving truck the week he moves out, that provided us with no permanent value to the city. But the tax benefit carries on for decades.
Right, so that's why I think it leaves us as a council that discretion to deny those, if that's the feeling that we have, is that it's not going to be long-term.
So we would receive as a council identification of the application of those funds. And so if we would see a list that was a lot of superficial items, then we could make the determination that that's not in our best interest to approve at that point.
Right.
However, if we saw a lot of infrastructure improvements or structural permanent improvements that would stay beyond the tenant, then we would gladly approve for those improvements.
Right, and that's exactly the reason we took the approach we did without putting a percentage or dollar threshold in there specifically.
And also, again, we wouldn't ask anybody to spend $1,000 on an application that we don't believe would be supported.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? Then let's go ahead and have a show of hands of those in favor of supporting the process that's been outlined and defined by the Economic Development Committee. Those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you, and relay the message to EDC that
Great.
we look forward to seeing this come
Appreciate it.
through. Thanks. Well, that wraps up the 4 items that we had for this evening. And if there aren't any other questions on anything, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien. Thank you, Alderman McHale, for the second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. This meeting's adjourned at 8:52. Good evening, everyone. It's a bit misleading. Good. Yeah, I think that's important for us to